In this video, we're going to cover how to do data analysis using Python. And if you're not a programmer, don't worry, it's not going to be scary. We'll use Google Colab for our environment. And the reason I'm using Google Colab here is, of course, we can install all of this on our local computers and have all the libraries installed and everything. But for a typical user, if you're just starting out, it's probably going to be a lot of things to do and a lot of things to learn. So that's why you can simply just go to collab.research.google.com, and that will take you to Google Colab. And you can basically just start a new notebook. And this basically gives you a virtual server with Python installed with all the necessary libraries, so you can do everything right away and get to the most interesting part. And to top all of that, it also has Gemini, which is basically Google's AI, built into it, which will help you with a lot of the code. Now, first of all, to analyze data, we need some data. So let's go ahead and get some data. Now, you could get this data from a lot of different sources. You could get it from Excel, from Google Sheets, from SQL databases. Here, I'm going to keep it simple. We'll just use a CSV file, which you could, of course, get it from Excel and Google Sheets too. So let's go ahead and download some CSV. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to go to data.cityofchicago.org. There are some good data sets you can download here and use. And if we scroll down a little bit here, you can see here there's this browse the data section. I'm going to go to this transportation section here. And here on the left side, I'm going to narrow this down to data sets. And see, the first one that comes up here, at least right now, is this traffic crashes. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on this. Let's take a look at this. And if I scroll down a little bit, we're going to see how big of a data set this is. So you can see here, this is 925,000 rows and 48 columns. So this is the data set I'm going to use to give you an example how we can use this Google Colab to actually run some data analysis on this. Now, first of all, let's download this data. So I'm going to go to export. And here there's this download file, as you can see, as an option, and CSV is okay. All data, that's what I want. I'm going to click download. This may take a little bit, so I'm just going to pause this video for a little bit. We'll come back to this. Okay, this is done downloading. Over here, you can see it's 479 megabyte file. This is not a super large data set. It's less than 1 million lines. You could use data sets much bigger than this for this analysis, but I'm just going to use this one as an example. Now, first, what I'm going to do, I'm going to basically upload this file to Google Colab environment. So this is Google Colab. I'm going to go here, and on the left side here, see we have a few different sections. If I open this first one, it gives me this. Then there are a few different sections like this. If I go to this folder icon, this is where we can actually upload a file. Now, if you want to continuously run analysis on this data going forward, you typically wouldn't want to upload this here to Google Colab because this is a temporary environment and it's going to remove this file once you refresh this. So typically you would probably upload it to your Google Drive and then mount that Google Drive to this project so you can next time just come back to it and use it. Here, for simplicity, I'm just going to go ahead and upload it the regular way. So I'll click upload. Here you can see this is that file, traffic. So I'll just click on this, hit open. And this is warning me about what I just told you about, that this is a temporary environment. Once you stop this runtime, it's basically going to remove the file, which is fine. Right now, I'm going to hit OK. Now, down here, if you look, it's basically creating this little circle. This is where it's uploading the file. So I'm going to wait for this. Again, this is a pretty large file. Once again, I'll pause this and resume once this is done uploading this file. All right, so this is done. This is done uploading here. This thing is gone. So let's get to doing some data analysis. So if you do any data analysis using Python, you are going to end up dealing with a library called Pandas. And that's the first thing we're going to do. We're going to start by adding a line here. We're going to import Pandas library. And typically when people import Pandas library, they rename it as PD. And basically what this does, it makes it easy later on to just type PD instead of typing Pandas. So I'm going to run this line of code. And you could keep listing multiple lines in this code block, but typically sometimes I like to separate different blocks here. So I'm going to click on this code and it's going to add another block of code right here. So now we ended up importing this Pandas library under variable PD. So the next part is going to be to actually grab that CSV file and all the data that's in that CSV file, which is this. Now this file has this crazy name. I don't want to type the name, so I'm going to just go ahead and rename this. So I'll just click here and rename, and I'll just basically just rename this to something easier, something like that. And that should be the name of the file now. So now at this point, to get to that file, we're going to do pd dot, which is this PD variable from here. And you can see here it suggests read CSV. Now there are many different file types you can do here. So if I type read, you can see there's like read Excel, CSV, clipboard, HTML, JSON, and there are all these different formats. Now in our case, it's a CSV. So I'm going to go read CSV, open parentheses, and then in parentheses, in quotes, we're going to basically enter the name of this file right here. You want to make sure you match it exactly. So this is the file name, traffic crashes from here, and we need to save this in a variable. So we'll go in front of this line, and we're going to make some variable name and make it equal this. Now, typically, the variables people call here is going to be something like df, short for data frame. Anytime you load something to this Pandas library, it creates what's called a data frame. And that's what df is short for. We can name it anything. So I could just name this X or Apple or my data or really anything else. But I'm just going to go with the convention. I'll just go df for data frame. So at this point, I'm going to run this, and that hopefully will go grab this file, import it, and we can do some data analysis on that. Now remember, that file is about 500 megabytes. So done running the line, as you can see. I'm going to add a new line. Now we might want to see what's going on inside of this df. So one way to see what's inside of it is to use a print line like this, and then type the name of the variable, df. And if you run this, it should basically give you a preview of what's inside of that data frame. So I'm going to run this. And this preview is not going to be in a very nice format. As you can see, there's this, there's all of that. Now, because we're in this Google Colab environment and it's using what seems to be some version of Jupyter Notebook, we should be able to also just type df without the actual mention of print. And if I run this, it will basically give us a little better view of that. You can see this is what I got. I'm going to zoom out of this a little bit so you can see this better. So you can see these are different column names. This is the data, and it keeps going for a while. There's more columns to the right. Now, if we want to see what this data looks like a preview, we can also see that right here. If I go back to this City of Chicago website, if I scroll up here, see there's this data, and it should give us a similar preview with what columns we have in this data and what this data looks like. So basically, what's going on here, it's basically all the accidents here, as you can see, and each line is one accident, and you can see it has things like date, it has like speed limit, it has all these different things, including like weather conditions. So there's all this data with all these different metrics that are in this. So pretty similar to basically what we have here. Here though, it's probably not going to show you every column. So if you keep scrolling right, when there's a lot of columns, see at some point it's going to do this and it hides a whole bunch of columns in the middle because there's a whole bunch of columns here. It doesn't want to just preview every single column because sometimes you can have data sets that literally have thousands of different columns, but it gives us a preview. So what you could do if there are columns you don't need, you could get rid of them. So an example of that could be, let's say there is this crash record ID column, or maybe there are some other columns here that you don't think you're going to ever need. So in those cases, it's probably best to delete those columns to save some memory. And it's also going to just expand this and make you see more of the other columns that you actually care about. So at this point now, if you don't know how to write actual code, you can use Gemini to help you with code. And for that, I'll just go on this top right corner. See, there's this little button for Gemini. So I'm going to click on this. It's going to add this. And what's really cool about this now has context of what's going on here in your code. So I'm just going to go here and say delete columns and then just list the columns I want to delete. So let's say I want to delete this crash ID. I'll do comma and then maybe this one too. I'll just do those two. That's good enough for me. And if I run this, see, it gives me this line. So I'm going to copy that and go here. Now you could keep this if you want, but I don't really need this. I'm going to delete that and paste that line, which is the line that's going to, as you can see, it gives these two columns, comma separated here. Those are the ones that we're deleting from our df data frame. So I'm going to run this. See, we ran that. Now, if you want to see what it looks like now, you can, again, add another code block. And if I now type df, run this, you'll see that those two columns that I had, they're now gone because we ended up deleting those by adding this line here. So now let's first try to make sure that our data matches our expectations. So first I want to see total number of records. So if I go look here and go back to our previous this about section, if I scroll down, if you remember, this was what it says, 925,000 rows. What seems to be, this is rounded number. It's not going to be exactly 925K. That's the number of lines we're expecting in our data set. So if I go back and go here, see this little preview I did here, it gives me all the way down here how many rows we have. So that's 924,652. So that's rounded 925K. And it's 46 columns. And if I go here, it says 48 columns because we just deleted 2 columns. So that makes sense. So I'm going to go back here and let's now get some analysis on this. So let's say the first thing we want to do is analyze this data by year. We want to see number of crashes. So you can see here, this one is 2025, this is 2020, this is 2024, 23. Let's say we want to get number of crashes by year. So I'll just go here and just type get number of crashes by year. Now notice there's no year here. We just have a date, but I'm just asking number of crashes by year. And here's the code that we got. So I'm going to copy this. And basically, I'll just replace this with that. So if you look at this, it's making sure that the column crash dates are actually dates. And then it's creating a new column here called crash year inside of this data frame. It's extracting the year out of this date. And then finally, once it gets that new data set with a new column called crash year, which has the year, then it does this group by statement by crash year over here and gets the total. So finally, it does the print here, which is going to show us the results. So I'm going to run this. And as you can see, we got a little warning here that could not infer the formats, so each element will be parsed individually. But in the end of the day, we got our results. Now this is doing this by printing this crashes by year. And because of that, it gives us this not a very nice view. Now, once again, I can add a code block here, and now we can just do this variable without that print statement, crashes by year. And that will give us this format, basically. I mean, it's the same data, just the format is different. You can see, like, we got 2013, 2014, just a few. At this point, they're probably just not recording it. They probably started, like, in 2015 area, looks like. And you can see, like, 2017, then it goes up, 2018, 2019, and then you can see 2020, it went down quite a bit. I think we can all guess what happened here, why this went down in 2020. But then again, you can see then going forward, it starts increasing again. And by 2024, we are pretty much at 2019 levels. And then finally, 2025, it's a smaller number because it's a partial year, right? So the year basically just started, so there's not a lot yet. So this is our number of crashes by year. So now let's say we want to create a chart out of this. So I'm going to copy this, name of this variable, and I'm going to say create a chart from that variable name. Run this. So to create a chart, it's going to import another library here, as you can see, which is what we're going to need to actually create the chart. So I'm going to copy this. I'm just going to create, well, I'll just do it right here. I'll just delete this line, paste it here. And this is where we're going to import that library under this name PLT. And then we take that crashes by year, which is the variable name from our previous steps, and plot a chart. So if you look here, it says the kind of the chart is going to be a bar chart. This is the size of the bars. And then it's going to create a title, X label, Y label, and finally show the results. So let's run this and we'll look into what these things are, right? So I'm going to run this. So you can see a bar chart by year. And basically, if you look up here, number of crashes by year, that's our title. Then we have our X label. So that's down here, year. And then Y label, see, number of crashes. You can see on the left. And finally, we're just going to show our results. Now, if we wanted to do some modification to this, we should be able to do that. So let's say you want to change the color of these bars. So I'm going to say change the color of bars to green. So as you can see, it did this. Now, if you look at this code, it looks very similar to this one. See, it's the same import, then it's doing the same bar charts, the same size, 10 by 6. There is an extra part here that says color green. That's what's different about this. Now, the rest of these lines, if you look here, they're the same. So basically, this is the only line that changes. So I'm just going to copy that line and update this one. Rerun this. Now, typically, when you're doing imports, you don't want to keep rerunning imports all the time because you already have the library. So typically, what I would do is separate this to a separate line for imports and then run the rest of these separately. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm just going to cut this. So any imports, let's just leave them on a separate line like this. So I'm going to run this. That's just going to import the libraries. So we can use this going forward too if we have to. Then I'm going to add another block of code and paste the rest of this code below. And we can rerun this part, which is the part that actually creates the chart. Now you can see our bars are green instead of blue. Okay, so we got our total by year. So I want to do a quick double check here. I want to sum all these numbers here, and I want to make sure it adds up to the same total number of lines we had, just to make sure we're on the right track. So I'm going to take that crashes by year, which is this from here, if you remember. And I'm just going to say get total sum from this. So as you can see, it gives me this. I'm going to just copy that. I'll just create another code block. And as you can see, that code block went up here. So I'm just going to move it down a little bit, or you can do it here. This is good too. But if you want to move this down, you can just click on this down button. See, it went one down. Again, I can do this and put that here. Or you can go up the same way. So I'm going to run this. So as you can see, 924,652, which basically is the same number we had when we were looking at our total number of lines. So that's a good sign. So that means we are on the right track. Now, also, a lot of these prompts that I'm writing here, you may want to also keep them here just for your reference, like get total sum from this. So to do that, you could just add a text block. Say this text block here. So if I click on this, so here I can just paste. So this is just a line that doesn't do anything. It's more like text. Think about it as like notes you write for yourself. So I'm going to move this up right here. So now we have this text that just shows what this is, and then we'll run the actual code. So if you want to add something like this, you can. Now let's add another code block. I'm going to move this down to the bottom. And this time, now that we got our total by year, let's try to get, if you remember this data set, let's actually look inside of that data set again. So our data is called df, just to remind you, that's the original data set. So if I do df, you can see this is our data. By the way, if you remember, we did create that year column. So if I keep going right now, at some point we should be able to see there's a new column now called crash year, which if I go to the original data, we just take a look under this data right here and scroll right. You'll see that the last column here is location. So that column year was created by our code, if you remember, up here in this line. So I'm going to add another code block. You can also click here and click plus. As you can see, that adds another code block. Now here I want to do total by year. Let's break it down further by one of the other data points. So for example, let's just look at this weather condition. So I'm just going to say total number of records by year broken down by weather condition. So I'm going to run this. Again, what it's doing, it's taking this crash date column and it's converting it to a date, which we have done already. There's no reason to run this again. Then it does this year column, which we also did. So we don't need this. So we really just need this. So we're going to copy the parts that we haven't done, paste it here, and run this code. And as you can see, we got our results. Now, again, once again, to look at this in a nicer visual way, I'm going to add another code block down here, and I'll just copy this new variable name and paste it here and run so we can see what this looks like. So you can see it goes like 2013 clear, then 2014 clear, then 2014 rain, and it gives us the count for each one of those. And there's a whole bunch of others here in the middle that we can't currently see. So total 121 rows of results. Now, if you wanted to look a little further into this, you can click on this little button right here that you can see showed up here. It says convert this data frame to an interactive table. And basically now we get this more interactive table where we can show how many records we want per page and look through this results table. But I'm not happy with this particular setup when it just puts each year and each condition. Now, you could probably make this better by clicking on crash year now, and it will sort it by year like this. But what I want to do, I want to put these weather conditions in columns so it's easier to view and compare what's going on. So I'll just go here and say, let's make sure, and I'll use that same exact column name, weather condition, is in columns in our report. So I'm going to do this, run this. So here's our results. I'm going to copy that and add another code block, paste it here. There's a new variable called report now. I'm going to run that. Once again, it gives me this format because we run the print statement. A lot of times what I like to do, actually, I wouldn't keep this print statements and just run the variable so I don't have this mess on the screen. But I'm just copy pasting now to just make this easier. So I'm going to take now that report variable. Anytime you want to change these names of these variables, you can. Just make sure if you do change this, you have to rerun this. So I'm going to take this report, scroll down, add another code block and paste it here. And now we can see we got that same report in this format where basically our weather conditions are in different columns. So more like a pivot table sort of format. And we have our years here. So now we can compare year to year, clear conditions, cloudy conditions. And of course, if you wanted to now make a chart out of it, you can ask to create a chart out of this report variable. So you can see immediately, very quickly, I'm able to get some of these reports. This will help you, first of all, just learn how to do some Python programming as you do this, right? Because these are the actual lines you would write. This will help you a lot. You definitely want to read these lines and make sure you're paying attention to what the line says and what it's doing. Because it's, again, just generated automatically by Gemini AI. Could be right, could be wrong. You always want to pay attention and make sure you're on the right track as you go step by step. There are a couple of extra tips I want to give you on this. One of those things is that since we have a lot of columns in this data, and let's say in the beginning you were thinking about deleting more of those columns because the more columns you have, the slower it gets to run these reports. First of all, it's going to take more of the memory. And then also, it just makes it more difficult to look through this data to understand what exactly you're going to be doing, especially when you're dealing with, let's say, hundreds of columns. So right now we only have like, what was it here? About like 50 or something, like 48 columns. And it's already difficult just to scroll through that list of columns and figure out what's going on. So a couple of things you can do once you get this data set into a data frame like df, then you can scroll down here and just type df and then dot and then columns. And first of all, what this is going to do, it's going to give you a nice report of all the columns that you have in this data in this nice comma separated view. So you can clearly see, okay, so these are the columns we're dealing with. And then sometimes as you look at this, you may want to look at one of the rows with all the data, with all the columns to see what's actually in them, to see what's helpful to you, what you want to keep and what you want to delete. And for that, let's see if Gemini can do this. If not, I'll just write the code myself. So I'm just going to go here just for testing. I'm going to ask, get me the data from row 1. Okay, so this is what we have. So I'm going to copy this. Scroll down. Let's add another block. Paste this here and rerun this. Unfortunately, this is not what I wanted. It got me the first row of the data from report dataset, which is this report we just did. I wanted the data from the original one. So I'm just going to write this line so you can see. So I'm going to go df, which is the dataset I'm getting this from. This is fine. The rest of this is fine. I also want to change this name, like row 1 data. So I'll just call this sample data and then just print that variable name. So I'm going to rerun this so you can see. So here we go. Now we got the first row, because in programming, indexes start from 0. It gives you a list of all the columns from this data and basically what's in that first line. So you can see it gives me the date for that line, and it gives me the speed limit, and then controls, daylight, etc., and then weather condition and all of this. This will help you kind of go through this and understand like what parts of this you need and don't. Maybe you look at this and you understand, okay, so maybe I don't need all this like street address and all these details. Maybe let's get rid of those columns. Cases when you get some of these NAs, that just means in that line there's no data. So you can try to go to a different line to see if you can kind of find a line with some data in it. So let's say instead of 0, if you type 1, it's going to go and get us the second line from our data set. If I do 77,000, now if you remember, this was like hundreds of thousands of lines. So I should be able to do 790,000, and it should be one of the lines. Now, if you get to a point when you get more than the data itself, it's just gonna not be able to do that. So if I go 1,200,000, there's no line like that. So see, I'm gonna get an error because this line doesn't exist. But this way you can get a sample from a particular row and kind of understand what's going on in your data when there's too many columns. Like, for example, I couldn't really view every column in this format when I was just looking left to right. But now if I just get one of these lines, then it's a lot easier, if I scroll down here, in this format to kind of see exactly what's going on in every column, what columns you need, what columns you don't need, and work with that. So one last thing I want to do here before I finish this video is, let's say you did some reports or some data transformations or whatever else, and at some point you just want to export that to like an Excel file or a CSV file. How do you do that? So I'm going to scroll down here and add another code block. So for that, let's say I have this report that I just made, and I just want to export that to like a CSV or an Excel file. So I'll just scroll down here and type that variable name report dot. And here, if you do dot and do 2, you'll see there are different ways you can export this data. You can make a CSV out of this. You can make an HTML file, PDF, JSON. You can see there are a lot of formats here. So on this one, I'll just keep it simple. I'll just do CSV, but any one of these you would be able to do. So I'll just call this report.csv and run this line. See, it did refresh this. If it doesn't refresh, you're going to have to sometimes click this refresh button. But there's that file called report.csv. I'm just going to download this to show you what this looks like. So this is that file. I'm going to open that. And here you go. In my case, I have a Mac, and this is numbers opening your CSV. If you have Excel or whatever other software, here's that CSV file now exported, and I can just open and work with that. And there you go. So that should give you a good example of how you can get some data and analyze it using Python and Google Colab and Gemini AI with basically zero programming experience. If you want me to do more videos like this, or maybe more in-depth videos, more complicated examples, let me know what type of examples you have in mind. Maybe I'll do a follow-up video on that. But for this one, that should do it. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.